episode 39.
Hello and welcome to episode 38
I almost got him.
of the Rugby League Coach podcast. Taylor has just tried to throw me, Lee Addison, off the scent, but he should know better. This is an award-winning podcast, Taylor. Award-winning. It's my dad's favourite. That's the award. My name's Lee Addison still. I've not changed it. I'm joined by Chris Budgeon and some other bludger. Chris Budgeon, how is the Sunshine Coast of Queensland?
A lot better the last couple of days. It wasn't too nice over the weekend.
Weather-wise, you mean?
Yes. Yes. Are you asking about the league?
I will soon, yeah. Yeah, I've got that. I want to talk about the A-grade stuff again because I think we've got a bit to follow on. Taylor, how are you doing? You're not a bludger, really.
Good, mate. Good. Had a good week. First weekend of QRL top grade, top flight rugby league. It kicked off on the weekend, which was really good to see, to be around. And just all in all, just really good spirits. How good's the NRL and the rugby league back to almost full flight with the A-grade competition starting in the next week or so as well?
Yeah, so basically we're in the thick of rugby league season already now, aren't we? So, look, James will join us soon, I think, from the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So
just got to park the bus.
Once James is on, we'll ask him about the UK report. But until then, I think we have to talk a little bit about the NRL and things that are going on there. And I guess the biggest option for us to talk about is Kalen Ponga and the whole concussion thing. And
yes,
I don't think we've really addressed it that much on this podcast, the whole concussion thing. But one thing that's been giving me the SH1Ts has been the amount of people who think they are doctors. So it is now, I firmly believe, and I'm putting it out there to you two, it's time to put ourselves in the hands of the medical profession when it comes to this stuff. I'll start with you, Taylor.
It's certainly time to let the medical professionals take over. It's beyond the point of us, thinking this and that. And I guess it also plays into the hands. People are also getting upset these days about the medical HIA, where the independent doctor is reviewing things off the field and calling for those players to come off. They're independent doctors because they're independent doctors. They have no stake in any game. They're not with anyone. And if an independent doctor can look at someone and say, for your health, you need to come from the field, who are we or anyone else to say that they are wrong? I've read a lot of articles. Trust me, I listen to podcasts, but I haven't spent a lick of a day in university to study these things, so I can't comment. I can't, and at the end of the day, these medical professionals are sworn to keep health and people's best interests at heart, and you just have to trust and follow that. Kalen's now in a situation where he's had many concussions over the space of the last year, 2 in the space of, 7 days or something like that were serious enough last weekend that the doctor stopped him, didn't they? And they pulled him off the field. And
there's no proof, I don't think, that he failed an HIA that day. So
no, he didn't.
Even if it was just precautionary. So
he's had a precautionary head knock last week, and then this week that happens, which obviously there was a lot of distress involved in it. I think you're looking at a long stint. I think you're looking at a very long stint.
What's your thoughts, Chris, on the general concussion question rather than Kevin?
Oh, look, 100% with Taylor. We've got to leave it to people who aren't self-interested. I mean, rugby league has a history of being a little short-sighted, and I think the independent doctors, exactly what Taylor said, the independent doctors are there for the health of the individual. They're not under pressure in a game where people are paid for results. Naturally, they're going to be biased. They're going to have clouded judgment, I think. And I've got my own personal view, Lee. I had to retire from the game very early because of head knocks, and back in the late 80s, you carried on and you finished games, and there was... we all know about the culture of head knocks back in the day. And I wish I'd had my time again in the current time when maybe I could have played for a lot longer and not had to give it away myself. But
do you mind me asking if you've had any symptoms now that you're in your 60s?
I'll let you know when I'm in my 60s.
Nah, seriously, do you mind me asking if you've had any symptoms?
Yeah, look, I do get... I don't know if it's just normal or not, but I worry that things will get worse as I get older. I mean, I am in my 50s, so the memory isn't what it used to be, but whether that's because of the head knocks or whether it's just getting old, I don't know, but I do get probably more headaches than the average person. But again, that I can't categorically say it's because of it.
No.
And unfortunately, we're in a day and age at the moment medically where nobody can, and I'm not ready to donate my brain to science to find out.
Now we'll go to somebody who's clearly had a few head knocks, but it's not stopping him driving the buses in the north of England. James Varley, you've put the bus keys to one side. Top of the morning to you, my friend. What's going on with your Barnet? What's going on with your Barnet?
I know I need to shave it. I've lost my razor. Yeah, I need to sort it out, Lee. Yeah,
I don't know. I think it's quite distinguished. What do you reckon, boys?
Got to put my glasses on to have a little look-see.
Look at him. He looks like a bad professor.
Nah,
yeah.
Keep it.
Yeah,
keep
I've been called that before when I have the hair on. Yeah.
Give us a bit of an overview of what's happened in England. I've not really seen much. I was too busy coaching this weekend.
I've not actually watched a lot. I've made a note of the results because I thought you might ask me this in the last couple of rounds. Well, the big shock was St Helens getting beaten by Lee.
Well, haven't St Helens lost 2 games on the bounce now?
They lost to Leeds the week before by right at the end of the get 20 by 1 point, and they lost to Lee last weekend. So maybe it's early days, but I mean we were both talking about there's a lot of pressure on Paul Wellens.
Chris Taylor, have you ever been over to England?
No,
or on a long journey like that.
I've been to Europe, Lee, but I didn't get to England or Great Britain.
You'll know just as a human travelling that far, it wipes you out, doesn't it? It messes with your body, and I think St Helens, James, are clearly, I think, suffering from having put so much energy into the trip over here that even just being off the game by 10 or 15% might be enough to lose some of these games because they're playing teams that are hungry. Leeds had lost the first 2 when they played them. Lee, obviously, are battlers. A club like Lee, when you're just getting promoted, you want to get as many points on the board as you can early before depth. So I think that's in the mix now. You're mumbling again, James. Stop mumbling when somebody else is talking. I have to tell him to mute. I have to tell him to mute it because he just goes.
Dad noises.
He's like he's you can imagine him at a football game when things happen. But I think that's another factor as well, James. But Paul Wellens is a fresh coach as well. He'll be on a learning curve right now. I'll give you that.
And yourself, Lee. You know yourself. When you're the benchmark, and they have been the benchmark for several seasons, everyone gets up in particular for that game. Everyone gets up in particular, which is one thing that made the Panthers so impressive in their back-to-back. And it's something that they would certainly be experiencing over there, is that once you win a couple in a row and you're starting to look pretty good, no one comes up playing a B or a C game. Everyone's on their A game when they come up against you.
It's hard to stay ahead of the pack.
England, James?
There was, at the weekend, there was a big score for Salford, because I know you did that analysis on Salford a couple of weeks ago. They went to Hull and won 60 points to 14. Well, Salford are the kind of team that if it truly clicks for them, they're going to rack up points against anybody because of the style of football they play. Yeah, and I guess this day it truly clicked. It can happen on the day. Castleford Tigers still struggling. I mean, they lost 36-6 at Huddersfield. Was I right in what I wrote the other day that Wakefield haven't scored a point in 3 games? I know, I know that they didn't score the round 2 scores. I didn't really look, but certainly I'm not absolutely certain about. But in the last 2 games, they've scored 0 against Huddersfield and Leeds. What the hell is going on there? Because the CEO's backing in too, isn't he? Is that Michael Carter? I think so. Yeah. Yeah. He's getting replaced by Coach Carter. Right. Yes. Yeah. I've just got it here. They've scored 24 and had 132 against, so negative 108. Right, that's shocking. And if you can find their round 1 score, that'll probably, because was that round 4 the other day? It was round 4 the other day, yeah. Trying to think who the actually played this season. Yeah.
Okay. Have you watched any NRL, James?
I've watched a couple of roundups. I've watched the NRL roundups, the last from round 1 and round 2. And
all right, well, just jump in on this conversation then while we keep talking. Do you reckon we've exhausted the concussion thing, boys? I mean, I guess, we've just got to keep it in the hands of the doctors, haven't we? And if a doctor is independent, then they're independent. I do believe that with the one at the Warriors or against the Warriors, the doctor took it as a precaution because of how many knocks Kalen Ponga had already had on the bonds. So, if anything, he was being extra careful. Well, then, is there a team?
I was just going to ask for clarification. After that knock, there are a few guys at the club talking about the fact that he was taken off because he stayed down, and there's an emphasis now that if a player stays down, that they're going to make them come off the field. Can anyone shed any more light on that?
Taylor would be screwed. They'd be hooking him every 30 seconds. Stayed down after every tackle.
So did 3 of the others. Look, I don't know for sure, but Lee, just thinking about it, how independent was the doctor if he knows Kalen Ponga's head knock history?
Maybe is that not understanding patient history?
Yeah, but
doesn't a good doctor look at notes before?
Yeah, but does he have a full document on every 30 whatever players that jump on the field?
Well, I'm sure. I would hope a good doctor has concussion history of every player. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
That'd be my thought.
That's just a bit of extra.
I mean, I think independence. I mean, unless you got them from the moon or countries that have nothing to do with rugby league, so USA, the south of England. No. I was going to say Melbourne. No. But unless you got them from somewhere else, India, China, wherever. Like, you could always argue that doctor's from New Zealand and no wonder he hooked him, But, yeah. Oh, look, anyway, none of us are doctors, but I think we all agree, don't we? Just put it in the hands of the...
there's nothing you can do.
We've mentioned Wakefield being in trouble, James. Do you reckon who'd win out of a game between Wakefield and the West Tigers at the minute?
I'm pretty sure West Tigers would win league, to be honest.
How many players have Wakefield got? Because if the Knights can do it with 10 or whatever they did, I'm sure Wakefield will be able to do it with 13.
Did anybody watch that game? Because I was driving. No, I was driving from Bundaberg. Did anybody watch that game?
Mate, I had nothing on. I had nothing on, but I chose to mow the lawn instead of watching the West Tigers play. That's where it's at the moment for me.
That's telling.
Were they down to 10 men? 11 men?
No, it's been sarcastic.
All right. Oh, were you? I'm taking you literally that with a problem.
Oh, they weren't that far off.
No.
Do you want to know the latest odds for the Premiership for Tigers?
Go on.
76 bung.
Right.
Seagulls $20. Dolphins 36. They might be worth a nudge, Taylor. They're in second place. Dragons are in third and they've played one game and they're $41.
If they honestly, if the Tigers are only $76 to win the Premiership, I'd be $75 to come out of retirement and play for the Dolphins by the 4th round. They are absolutely no chance. You may as well make that $1 million and no one would still have his poke at it. There's no chance.
What about this? The Broncos are paying $10. They're not winning a Premiership this year.
Well, Lee, there's a lot of hysteria about the Broncos right now because they've won 2 on the trot.
As they did last year, by the way.
Yeah, but against 2 very experienced sides. I know.
As they did last year, by the way.
I completely understand, but where you'll find when the Broncos are hot, everyone loves them. Everyone loves them. And that's one thing about the Broncos. When they're hot, they're really hot, and people just can't believe it. I predicted last year's backslide for them. I really thought they didn't have it in them to play finals footy. I thought there were better sides out there. And they did. They backslid heavily. This is still a side that has a form slump like that in them.
For sure.
I still think they certainly have a form slump, but they're also a side that could put it together and make the 8, for sure. Do I think they'll win the competition? No, I don't at this stage. I don't think they've shown enough to be in that conversation yet. But if they keep going with the form they are at the moment, quite possibly be somewhere in the top 4.
Thank you so much for that, Taylor.
No, you're welcome. That's my analysis. Taylor Brown.
Penrith Panthers $4.20. The Rabbits $8. Warriors 46, Titans 61, Roosters 650, Sharks $12, Knights 71, Storm $9. Did anybody watch that game?
The Storm Bulldogs game?
Storm
No,
Bulldogs,
I had a
yeah.
wedding on Saturday, so I missed a couple of the games this weekend.
I watched it.
Chris. Go on,
It was very unstorm-like, but they did have quite a few of their normal, their top players out. There was a lot of holes in around the ruck, and their defence just wasn't as punishing. And then they started to lose a bit of composure, which is again unstorm-like. But and the Bulldogs passes stuck, and they pushed through the middle, and then they supported each other well. So it was still a surprise to me. I certainly didn't tip it, but the Bulldogs deserved it.
Cowboys paying $15, Bulldogs 26.
Cowboys 15's worth a nudge. With the Storm, I think they're probably not going to be a lone situation, them losing to the Bulldogs. I think they might be going through a little bit of they're struggling at the moment. They've got a Sofa Solomon out.
They slid a bit last year. I think what shocked me was the scoreline. I mean, if the Bulldogs would have won by 2, you'd have sort of gone, okay. But
well, there's no Munster. There's no Pappenhausen. There's no Sofa Solomona from now on either. They do have some players on the sideline, some key players for their side. They do have Welch back, which is really good leadership for them. They still have Jerome Hughes, one of the best halves in the game. And they still have Harry Grant, one of the best hookers in the game. But I still think overall they do lack a little bit of direction, and they lack the spark that they have with Munster and Pappenhausen. So, look, I think they're going to have this little form slump, and they're also suffering from the fact that they've lost Kenny Bromwich, Jesse Bromwich, all in the same year, Felice Kafusi. This is 3 major signings to the Dolphins, but they lost the majority of their leadership group all at once.
And that showed, Taylor, in the way they got frustrated. They got frustrated against the Bulldogs, and they tried to play catch-up, and they got out of the Storm grind. And that's why, if it was a 2-point ball game, I think the Storm can get home in a 2-point ball game, but not when it blew out. They certainly were not as calm and as confident in themselves as what a Storm team usually is.
Well, I think that those players missing there, those 5 experienced players we just spoke about, 6 experienced players from last year's side, it's probably the difference between making it a 2-point ball game and making it that 14 or 15 or whatever point ball game it is.
It's half of your pack gone, isn't it, with the Bromwiches and the Sofa Solomona? That's that's and your fullback gone, and you're losing playmakers and middlemen.
They still have one of the best coaches in the game. They still have a known great recruitment history. They still have young players coming through that are performing well. I thought Will Warbrick's done really well for them in the opening couple of rounds, and they've had some shining lights that have debuted, absolutely. But you just can't take that many really key players out of a side in such a short amount of time and not suffer the consequences. I think Craig's probably a good enough coach to have realised there was a leadership drop in the pre-season and off-season and have made key changes to stop that. But once you have months to go, Pappenhausen, all not available for the start of the year, I think there's definitely a leadership hole there at the moment, and that's just certainly contributing.
Bulldogs are paying 26, Raiders 31, Eels 21. I'm sure there'll be a few people in the Parramatta district having a slap on that. But we're back to the Tigers, 76. Boys, what are we going to do about the Tigers? What's going wrong? What we're going to do?
I think it's a little bit unrealistic to expect the Wooden Spooners to improve a hell of a lot in 2 games. I know they were diabolical. Yeah. I know they were diabolical, and I fell for the trap of having hope at the start of the season as a Tigers supporter, so that's taught me a lesson. But it is going to take time.
Yeah, I had a bit of hope with the people that signed. They made some good signings, but they don't seem to have started well. So,
is Tim Sheen's past his use by date, Taylor?
Look, I don't think past his use by date is something I'd say. Coruscant had limited minutes. Bateman hasn't come to play yet. Clemmer has.
Stop. James Bateman. What's his form like?
Well, I've not really seen. I've only seen the roundup play. I need to see the full games, but he just seems to have been.
No, I mean in England. He's not played a game. He's not played a game in Australia. Yeah, what was he like last year in England?
For him yet. He wasn't brilliant. I liked when I saw that. I didn't watch every week, but when I saw that playoff game that they played against Leeds, when he incidentally got sent off, I was impressed by his kick pressure and all that. But I was interested in that World Cup second row analysis that he did with Whitehead and Bateman, where Whitehead were just looking far more effective.
Head and shoulders above. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't impressed with Bateman at the World Cup, to be honest. I think he's not the player he was a few years ago, because I think Whitehead's kick on. Sorry, mate, Taylor. So you mentioned Bateman, and then you said who else?
Well, Clemmer hasn't had his best couple of games either. He hasn't been on song. Mind you, he hasn't really been at his best for the last couple of years. Papali'i.
How old is Clemmer now?
He'd be 29 or 30.
How old is Clemmer now?
29 or 30.
Yeah, he's been around
same kind of age as Matthew Grote and Teddy.
He's my age. Yeah, so 29.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I think his birthday is at the end of the year, so he might be 30 in December, late December, I believe. Because I remember being told once that if his birthday was 2 or 3 days later, he would have been in the year younger, and he was that big at my age. I was thinking, gee whiz, how would he have? Anyway, so they've got Papali'i as well, and Api Coruscant. So they've certainly got a good forward pack on their day. Joe Offahengawi is there. He's no slouch by all means. They have a fairly good nucleus, enough to be better than what they are and enough to be better than what they're producing. There's something going on when you put on a Tigers jersey, and I don't know if it's a confidence thing around the joint, but there was a similar thing happening with a Titans jersey for a while, similar thing happening with a Bulldogs jersey, and a Knights jersey to some extent. And those issues need to be addressed at those clubs. I don't think at this stage I'm a smart enough man and all been around the game long enough to know what that issue is. But I can always speculate. I think they need to clear the back of houses in most of those places.
Chris,
that's
Luke
my
Brooks.
opinion.
Luke Brooks, discuss.
I agree with your statements you said last year, Lee. I think
Chris. Yeah, go on.
You didn't say Chris.
I did, didn't I, Chris?
You said discuss.
I did.
Yeah.
I said Chris.
I thought he said discuss. Sorry.
No, but Taylor, look, you
I'll
know me. I
apologise.
don't ever want to keep you in your box. So please, Chris, you don't mind just waiting a couple more minutes, dear.
Not at all.
Luke Brooks, Taylor. Over to you, Taylor Brown.
I think very much similar to what you said, Lee. I think they're in a marriage that's just gone on a bit too long, and they're both unhappy. And I think they'd both prosper looking into different avenues. I think if you found they had an amicable split in 6 months, they might be in happy long-term relationships with other people and be thriving. But I just don't think West Tigers and Luke Brooks will work out.
Taylor, can Chris talk now?
No, I was going to go to Varley next.
Chris.
I was optimistic at the start of the season, Lee, that he might find his mojo back under Tim Sheens. It wasn't too long ago he won the Dally M, even in an underperforming side. But I'm leaning towards, I think he's only got a few weeks if he doesn't start to show something soon. And again, it's also difficult for a halfback in any side when your middle's not doing well and when people are dropping the ball around you and that sort of thing. But from what I heard, he was just as bad as, or just as big an offender at poor catch pass and poor basics on the weekend as anyone else. So
yeah,
I think his time's limited. I certainly wouldn't be, my patience is running out because I think, there's definitely some ructions there and it's not a happy marriage. I just don't know if it's recoverable. I think I'm leaning towards it. It's time to start looking elsewhere because they have persisted with him. But who are they going to replace him with? I don't see anyone else in their stock.
Mitchell Moses they're after, aren't they?
Well, they just let go of Jock Madden. They just had him. They just had
Jock
him.
Madden. They had Jackson Hastings, and I don't know what it is about Jackson Hastings that he gets moved on from so many clubs, but he was one of their better performers last year.
Jackson Hastings went well in England, didn't he, James?
He did, got Man of Steel, didn't he, when he was at Salford, and then went to Wigan. But I think he came over to England because he'd fallen out with clubs in Australia, as seems to be the case. That happens quite a lot. Just going on, I'm going to have to go. I'm going to have to go in a few minutes, Lee. But just going on individuals, I know we're going back to a different game. Reece Walsh, he played well for Brisbane at the weekend. From what I saw on the roundup, it really did play well. And Moses and Mulitalo performed well for
Mulitalo.
Mulitalo, yeah. He performed well.
Mulitalo. You've just come in and just like disrupted everything, James, in this podcast. You've just been here for 20 minutes and then
I've just stirred it all up.
On your own buzz, and then now you're off now to drive your buzz.
It's a standard James Varley podcast. He came in with a list of things he wanted to get off his chest. As soon as he had to go, he starts just pumping them out.
I remember being at a committee meeting once at a club, and there was a bloke there that we used to call Tony Pepperoni, right?
Right.
And he was a bit, I don't know how you describe him, but he was just, he was unique.
Right.
And we're having a committee meeting, and it was like, any reports for the, people were saying, I ran the canteen the other day, we got this. And then they went to Chris, and then Chris said, I've noticed a problem in the dressing room that might need fixing. And then they got to Tony Pepperoni, and he went, me and my girlfriend Jane went to Brisbane at the weekend and went to the markets. It was very nice. And he genuinely meant it. And everyone went, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Tony. Yeah. Because he genuinely meant it. And that reminds me of your approach to this podcast, James. Like,
right.
You're just coming on and just talking about whatever you want and changing people's names, Muller Marlowe or whatever you just called him. And you've not even brushed your hair. You've not even shaved your hair today. It's.
No, it's shocking, isn't it? I'll get a slap on the wrist.
I quite like it. It makes you look friendlier.
Yeah. Oh,
no.
All right. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Has it been snowing where you are, James?
No, it's not snow. It's hair.
Yeah. So that's not snow on top of there, but no, it snowed a lot at the end of last week. It really was, but bad, and it got to about -6 on Saturday night, something like that.
How was it driving in that weather?
Not a lot of fun driving a bus in that weather, I must admit.
You have to go dead slow.
Well, yeah, it just had to be really kept. 1 or 2 buses got stuck as well, so
Jeez.
yeah, it was just freak conditions, really. I'm going to have to disappear, guys, anyway, so I'll try and join you next week.
No worries, mate. You take care and drive safe.
See you, mate.
I will do. See you. Cheers, guys.
All right, next topic, boys. NRL potentially going to 20 teams. Personally, I think there's enough talent in Australia alone to fill a lot more than 20 teams, and that's before we even start going elsewhere to look for talent. And I just think that the powers that be, some of them are a bit lazy in terms of not necessarily lazy because they're lazy, but they're just, when you've done a job for so long, you end up just finding the shortcuts and going down that avenue and ringing the same old people and going through the same old processes, think you found the shortcuts. So I think there's a bit of that. But also the game isn't well resourced enough to find all these players. So that's why there's this perception there's not enough talent going around. So that's my 2 bobs worth. Boys, I'll start with you, Chris. 20 teams, what do you think about it? And where should the extra 3 be?
Yeah, bring it on. Bring it on, I reckon. There's, I think the talent I think there's enough talent there, Lee, but I also think you bring in 3 new teams that are exposed to you always get better when you're playing around people that are better than you anyway. So I think the talent will be there. And, I don't buy into the argument that there isn't enough talent. It generally comes from people who've retired anyway and they're not playing the game themselves. But I think New Zealand deserves a second team. I love the idea of a Pacifica, but I just, to have different Pacific nations come together as one banner, I think is going to be a huge challenge from a political standpoint, from a self-interest standpoint. I'd love to see it. Don't get me wrong. I really would. Got a very, very, without getting too into my own personal situation too much, I'm very, very well connected to Pacific Island people. But and I think I'd go for Perth. I think we've got to get out of Sydney anyway. I think I'm all for. I don't think it would ever happen because, again, there's too much self-interest, but I'd move a Sydney club to Perth or to broaden the horizons a bit. New Zealand would be my first. Definitely New Zealand would be my first. Don't know that the regional areas of Queensland could support. Cairns is not a big town. To support an NRL team, Cairns is not a big town. I don't know how well they'd go there because they were talking about basing a Pacifica team in Cairns. But yeah, bring it on. I'd love to see a few more teams in the comp.
I am torn between Wellington and Perth. For one, I'd like to see a PNG team in. So maybe that comes under the Pacifica banner. I don't know, but they've been in the Q Cup now and established themselves in the Q Cup now for a while. So I'm sure they can make the next step up. If that is aided by a Pacifica brand, then so be it. And I'd love to see another team in Southeast Queensland, and I'd love to see one representing the sort of Western Corridor there. I think Easts have got a great package, but I think they're a bit too close to where everyone else is, if you like. So geographically, I think we probably needed something a bit further out. So if East can somehow get on board with the Western Corridor and work out something there, then that could be quite powerful. So there's my three. I've actually come up with four because I'm a bit torn between Wellington and Perth, because I do really want an extra New Zealand team. I think there's enough talent there to there's enough talent there. Whether there's enough fan interest there is a different matter. And money. Taylor, were you picking your nose then?
No, I was scratching the outside of my nose.
There's a picture out there actually where I think I've been caught picking my nose. The picture is of the kid, but I don't know if I was picking it or scratching it, but it looks sus. I doubt I was picking my nose in the middle of the session, I've got to be honest.
I've got no problem picking my nose.
Definitely.
I'll pick my nose right now. I couldn't care less.
And I do scratch the inside of it quite a lot.
Yeah, scratch your brain. I am of the belief that what the Dolphins have done this year and what the NRL have done with the Dolphins has already provided a really successful blueprint on how to expand the competition. I think for the moment, going into those areas that have not been, can I say, mined enough, I think there's more supporters there that would jump ship. The amount of Brisbane supporters, Brisbane's a large place that just sort of were North Brisbane. They didn't support the Broncos. They had other teams elsewhere, and they may have been sick of them. They may have been Warriors fans from New Zealand, all this sort of stuff, and they jumped on the Dolphins. The Dolphins have had huge success with crowds over their last two games. Late 30,000 for Suncorp, and they had a packed house at KO Stadium on Saturday.
How well it's gone. I can't believe how well it's gone.
The fans are just getting behind them. I mean, the on-field performances are certainly going to help in the next month. But what was brought to the table for the first two rounds was purely just the name and the hype around them coming into the competition. The fan base they will hold now through on-field performance, absolutely. But everything in the lead up to what we can see currently is just the addition of these sides. I think what you've touched on early there is going to Wellington. I'd love to see that, because I think there's, as you said, it's probably a team and a town that a lot of people go for the Warriors, and they might just be looking for that reason to, that extra reason. My neighbour works for AFL Queensland, is a statistician for AFL. He goes to games and he does the stats on disposals, all those sorts of things for AFL Queensland. That's his job. Loves it. Massive AFL fan. He has bought a Dolphins jersey. He watched round one at home passionately with his wife and his kids. They all bought Dolphins gear. This is an AFL man through and through. Last Saturday, when the game was at KO Stadium, he sat there through the wet with his family to cheer on the Dolphins.
Yes.
This is something we're getting. Now, Brisbane's always been here. Brisbane's always been there, always been the Broncos, but the addition of someone a little closer, a little hitting hard to home, where his kids go to school, has been enough to convert this man to the state where he's buying tickets.
I think the North Side is its own sort of republic as well.
Yeah, 100%.
I think northern Brisbane people have this strong sense of identity.
Yeah, and southern Brisbane
isn't
people
necessarily on the south side.
Yeah, I think they just, you guys have a strong sense of, 5-finger discounts and stuff down there on the south side. You're sort of smelly. But I think if you attack these regions where there are teams present, but they're a little bit further away, you're going to get more homegrown fans that may even convert from other sports just for looking for some passion to get involved with. Now, that's Wellington. I think you find that in Wellington. I think you get that with the Western Corridor of Brisbane, whether that's a Toowoomba through Ipswich and maybe that sort of area. I think.
Well, you're nodding your head for, Chris. You didn't even put them on your list.
Because
I regret saying that, because I have, if you go back to a couple of previous podcasts, I did really endorse the Clydesdales being back in the in the sorry, were they called the Clydesdales this year?
Yes, the Western Clydesdales.
I'll just go to the producer and just check if our statistician can you just knock on next door if you can just get him to check through the archives and check that Chris did mention the Toowoomba Clydesdales. Yeah.
And on that note, like Toowoomba as a town and population, just the town itself is 4 times the size of Cairns. So when they talk, and I know that they're probably thinking Pacific are in Cairns because it's closer to PNG and that sort of thing, but that would water down, for me, that would water down for the Cowboys supporter base. And I would definitely vote Western Corridor before the East, the Firehawks or whatever they're going to be called.
Yeah.
And putting anyone in Cairns, I think definitely that. And again, you'd get that tribal thing, I think, if it was sort of, if Ipswich is the centre, and it's only an hour to Toowoomba, from Toowoomba to Ipswich. So a lot of people would make that drive.
Yeah, I think you go Western Corridor. I think you go Wellington, you get another New Zealand side. And the third one I'm up for a discussion about. I'm not sold anywhere. I think there is merit having a Pacifica side, but
the thing with the Pacifica side is Albanese wants it because he wants to create a scenario where those countries have more links with Australia than China, basically. So that means there'll be governmental help. The problem is if Albanese doesn't get voted in 3 years' time. And
one thing as
that could collapse like a pack of cards.
One thing as well, Lee, is I have loved the inclusion of the Hunters into the Q Cup. My debut was against the Hunters when their first game was in Cup. I've loved playing. They were one of my favourite teams to play against because you knew you'd get 5,000 to the game, no matter where you played them, in PNG or here in Brisbane, because they travelled. They had a travelling band, very passionate, and they hit hard. You knew you were in a real game. There was never one of those games where it was, it was always a tough game. The thing is, though, in the Q Cup, they have had a majority PNG. Obviously, it's a PNG-based side, so they're all PNG players. If you went to the NRL with a PNG side, you would need that injection of Australian players or just really good players around, whether they be Stephen Crichtons, who are Samoan or Tongan, or whether they be Jerome Hugheses that are New Zealand. You'd need to bring other people in to really support that and prop it up. It certainly can be done. I just think they need to be a little bit more diverse with their approach by doing that sort of thing.
Well, look, boys, I mean, obviously none of us have done our business cases. We've not done our research for each venue. I mean, I do believe that the research that went into the last choice was quite significant. So, and it's also research that goes into commercial viability and whatnot. So, population growth and so there's so much that we don't know that goes into it. Basically, I mean, it was a very, very poorly kept secret that Redcliffe were going to get in for a while. I mean, how anybody at the Firebirds or what they're called,
the Firehawks. That'd be the first thing I'd change about their bid.
Absolutely,
it'd be. I wouldn't call them the Brisbane Firehawks. I would include the whole Brisbane Tiger. If they want Brisbane Tigers want to be involved, absolutely. I'd call them the Brisbane Jets or the Brisbane Jets or something that's a bit. You need something from Western because that's the catchment. It's the catchment. I'm sorry, but
the Dolphins in Redcliffe.
Very, very, very poor area.
Is there dolphins in the water in Redcliffe?
Yeah, there is.
Pretty close by.
Yeah.
I mean,
and there's eels in the Parramatta River.
Yeah.
Is there tigers in Balmain or Campbelltown? Are there raiders in Canberra? There's definitely bulldogs in Canterbury.
Oh, yeah.
You could argue there's a few cowboys in North Queensland.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Melbourne do have storms.
Yes.
The only nights you have in Newcastle are messy. I assume there's the odd shark in Cronulla.
And I reckon you've slayed a few dragons in Wollongong.
I don't think there's that many chickens wandering around in Bondi. Certainly no Titans on the Gold Coast.
A few hot chicks in Bondi, mate.
Hot what?
Hot chicks in Bondi.
Well, there's something you could do with the word Titans that take a couple of letters out. You could do something with that in there. I don't know if there are warriors in Auckland in the actual sense of the word. I don't know how many rabbits are running around Redfern.
Yeah.
Or panthers prowling around Penrith.
The Rabbitohs does have a historical context, though, Lee.
What is it?
There used to be, back in the day, back in the early 1900s, there used to be blokes wandering through the streets selling rabbits that they'd killed. And yeah, so
what's the difference between a rabbito and a rabbit?
Well, that's what they'd call out. Rabbitoes.
Got you. Thank you, mate. That's the best line on this podcast ever. That's made the podcast right there. Dragons. There's a lack of dragons in Illawarra and in
the St. George region.
The St. George region. And sea eagles. I mean,
yeah, it'd be a couple of them floating around.
A couple of eagles flying around, yeah. So therefore, when we're choosing the name, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's in the area. So Ipswich Jets is because of the airbase.
That's right.
Yeah.
I like, that's why the Jets has a Western feel to, just saying the Jets, if they were the Brisbane Jets, it still has that Western feel, doesn't it? But I still think it's got to be Western something. The Western something.
Western Reds.
What colours would they be? We're out of colours. We're out of colours.
Oh, there's not that many dark green.
Oh, it's dark green and black, wasn't it? With their when they were their bid.
Who plays in yellow at home?
The Raiders. Oh, at home.
Yeah,
Raiders had a fair bit of yellow at one stage. Parramatta
who plays in sky blue at home?
The Blues.
Yeah, the Clyde
Sharks a little bit.
The Sharks, yeah. Look, there's options, Lee. I'm not saying there's not options, but
no.
Yeah,
Moving on.
I think certainly the first place I'd look would be New Zealand or Brisbane again in that Western area. I think that would be really successful.
Moving on, I want to talk about the A grade thing again, because I know there's been a few updates this week, Chris, that you'll probably be all over. All three of us, I think we do fear a little bit for the future of A grade football in certain parts of Australia. I came up with some little reforms while I was driving to and from Bundaberg. I think we need to have a portability whereby players can be loaned out to clubs very easily. So, for example, one of the things that's affecting A-grade participation on the Eastern Seaboard. So some teams are benefiting from this, but only for a short time, and it's also taking teams away from their homeland is flying and fly out work. Yeah. So flying in, flying out to the mines, for example. So imagine you were based in Brisbane and you'd signed for your local club, but you're a fly in and fly out worker. I would like to see something happen whereby that player could actually sign and register for two different sides and essentially participate for both. But both clubs had to agree and for that portability. So I'd like to see that. The other thing I'd like to see is some kind of are you both there, boys, or have you frozen? Oh, you there?
Yeah. No, I was gonna pick up on that point, Lee, because
just
I know that
hold it okay. If you don't mind, Chris. I just want to put my other one in.
So Taylor, are we supposed to be silent or are we supposed to be talking?
Oh, I don't know. Lee sort of
no, just wait. What happened was it looked like both your faces had frozen. It looked like you'd frozen. Maybe you've just fallen asleep. And then the other thing is, I think what is starting to become a problem is teams can't always put 17 on the field. So sometimes they turn up with 13. I coached an A-grade team with 11 once. We managed to win a game. But I think you should have to play with 11 against 13. And then the opposition, if there's a certain score line reached, have to then drop some players off to allow so that the game, so this stops teams forfeiting basically. And then the third thing I'd like to suggest is actually a shorter season and some more lateral thought in terms of statewide or region-wide knockout competitions or sub competitions, so that you're not looking at it from a point of view of I'm starting a preseason in November, I'll finish next September. Oh no, I'm not going to bother this year. So just having 2 or 3 bite-sized competitions throughout the year. So there's my 3 suggestions that I'm putting to the board. Chris, you couldn't wait to talk over the top of me, so I'm going to go to you first.
The dual registration, I believe, it exists in the women's game in Queensland. and there has been girls that have played for our club and also for Central Queensland club in the one season. So that, I think it's a great idea. I can't 100% say that it exists in the men's. But
I don't think it does. So, it might be that.
And I think it's an exemption. You've got to apply for an exemption anyway, and which I'm fine with. But
so say in the area, sorry, Chris, say in the area where there's a couple of A-grade teams that have bought up all the players, right?
Yep.
And then there's a couple that are really short, and there's a couple that are close to extinction. I'm sure in some ways it would benefit the player and the host club more. Let's call them players 21, 22, and 23, right? If they were loaned out on a weekly basis to some of those lower teams, they could earn the money that they get for appearance for that team. So they wouldn't play in reserve grade. They'd probably not earn anything or very little. So you could actually loan them within that competition. Because what we're having teams folding left, right, and centre. But that's because we're applying the same rules that we have for 100 years.
Mm.
And I'm just suggesting that, because one of the things that was brought up last week, that a couple of clubs hoover up all the players. Well, one thing that I'm sure they prefer player number 21 and 20 to 24 to do is play A grade somewhere, as long as they could come back and still. And the other thing is you just make sure they don't play against you. So I'd like to see something like that in place. I know it affects the integrity of the competition a tiny bit, but we're talking about the future here. We're talking about, if we keep dropping at the rate we are around these areas, we're going to have no game to talk about in 10 years, are we? So we've got to do something. That's my thought around that anyway.
So on the weekend, Valentine Richard, a front rower for the Capras, played a game for the Papua New Guinea Hunters. They had some injuries in their squad, things and that happened. So instead of pulling someone up really fresh from the Digicel Cup, which is the competition throughout Papua New Guinea, they loaned a player from the Capras that they weren't using for round one.
So it can happen. But that would have also been an agreement between those clubs. And also, there's a unique travel and visa thing in there as well.
Yeah. Last year, the Capras actually had several players from the Dolphins dual registered. So if they didn't get enough if they weren't getting game time for the Dolphins, they could go play for the Capras. Last year, the Clydesdales, the Dolphins had a bye, or they had something happened in the under 21s competition, and about 8 of their players were dual registered with the Clydesdales in an agreement to help prop up the Clydesdales. They went over to the Clydesdales for that match and essentially won them their first match of the season. So this is starting to filter down throughout the senior competitions in the QRL, where players and clubs are saying, okay, well, we've got players here that we may not use this week. You need them.
Yeah.
Let's do a loan deal. This is happening on a weekly basis throughout the senior competitions in Queensland Rugby League. Now, there would be a lot of paperwork and things like that involved in it. And it also would take full-time staff, both with the QRL and each of those clubs, to ensure that everything got done in time. That could be one thing that lacks in your little effort there, to loan players to other clubs during the season.
Just need a map, really, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, what you need really, though, is the open attitudes of the clubs and the leagues, because I was part and heavily involved in the growth of the girls' game in the Sunny Coast, and there wouldn't be a competition, and the girls' game in Queensland wouldn't be where it is now, girls and women's, if there wasn't the flexibility shown. There has been a lot of that. There were clubs that merged with another club because each club only had 8 or 10 players, and they merged together for a whole season, and there was lots of loaning. There was lots of situations where there wouldn't have been games of footy if there wasn't flexible mentalities and flexible attitudes on behalf of the league. Yep. So I think the men's side can learn something from the way the women's and girls just made sure people who wanted to get a game of footy got a game of footy.
Yeah.
So the Addison plan, stage 1 through. What about the 11-a-side or whatever?
No.
If we're playing 11-a-side, what I don't like, and it happened we had a 9s competition recently that What I don't like about 11-a-side and when you reduce the numbers is playing on the same side field, you tend to get more injuries. I'd be
the other one as well,
if you pulled in the sidelines.
The other one as well then is reduce, and I forgot to mention this one, reduce the game. Don't play 80 minutes, play 60 or 70. One of the most ridiculous things we do in rugby league is when we're kids and we're fittest, we play for 20 minutes. We then go to 25. Then when we start drinking and partying, they make us play 30 or 35. And then when we're an adult and we train a lot less and work harder and have families and everything, they want us to play 80 minutes. Now, if you think about it, I mean, some of the blokes that are playing A-grade football, they're hard pushed going hard for 20 minutes, and some of them end up going for 80, and it slows the games right down. So that's the other thought there. And then the third thought was shorter seasons and different competitions and thinking a little bit laterally vis-a-vis what competitions we're actually asking them to be in.
I agree with that. And there's actually here, north of Brisbane, there's a competition called the Pine Cup that happens between the Dayboro Cowboys, Sanford Stags, the Holy Spirit Pine Rivers, Pine Rivers Bears, and Holy Spirit. Now, these are 4 clubs that play against each other, and it's only they play 3 games. They play 1 game against everyone, and then the highest aggregate plays in the grand final, and whoever wins the grand final hosts the grand final the next year, and all these sorts of things. It's basically a preseason comp for those 4 clubs. I would absolutely like to see a preseason comp, then maybe a mid-range, a different comp throughout the year that maybe went for about 10 rounds or something like that, and that's it. And that's it. Why not? Yep. Yeah, I agree with the shortening up because it does make a difference. My brother plays A grade in southwestern Sydney for a club called the Camden Rams.
Yeah, the Rams.
Up you Rammer won the competition last year. Good on him. But he almost didn't play one year because he said, I really want to go traveling in Europe, and the European summer is the Australian winter. So I don't really want to sign up, play 3 games, go for 10, 12 weeks, come back for 4 games. I'd be letting them down as well as, you know what I mean? So I might just have the year. Now, that happened to be the year that COVID happened, so he didn't end up going on his trip. But that's a genuine conversation where these lads are at that right age. They go, I want to travel. I want to do this. You know, I can't commit myself to all of that. And if I go and play 3 games and then don't play half the season and come back and play 4, I'm sort of doing the wrong thing by people. So
the summary of this is take a 21st century attitude to a 21st century problem rather than a 19th and 20th century. I mean, the real 21st century attitude would be to do it all as a computer game. Do it all on the Xbox. League Live, A-grade version.
Well, there'd be less injuries there. And blokes, I'll tell you what, one thing, Lee, blokes my age do worry about if they're not getting paid good money and don't have all the right insurances, is if I get the wrong injury, if I do my ACL, how am I going to support my family? How am I going to continue my career? My boss is going to let me go. I've got a big job on in Cairns for 4 weeks. I've got to be there for 4 weeks, so I can't play. You know what I mean?
You certainly couldn't play A-grade football now with the job you're doing.
No, absolutely.
No way. You couldn't commit to training, number 1.
No.
So your body wouldn't be quite right. Number 2, if you got an injury of that nature, it would be disastrous for your,
catastrophic.
Boys, on that wondrous note, what a podcast. So many areas covered. So many areas.
No Clemmer, Hastings, Tommy Talau, nothing.
That was a bit of handbags. It was nothing. Nothing.
But I mean, old mate at Fox Sports had something to say. Buzz Rothfield, he was chirping.
Yeah, I guess.
Lee,
what?
If you were coaching us in Gregory's College side,
there was one,
a side that I was in, and let's say Billy Kitt, for good old time's sake, got absolutely taken out and smashed, right? And then after the game, someone went to apologise, and Billy Kitt started layering up because that's Billy Kitt. That's what he held halfback. And I come over the top and said something just to get in between it, stick up for me, mate. I don't think you would have punished me or worried about it. I think you would have said, well, that's my front rower doing what front rower's supposed to do.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a little bit of hustle and bustle over not much with that situation.
Yeah.
If
And I
Clemmer-
think
if
Tommy
Clemmer looked at
Talau
it-
was a bit like, his manlyhood has been affected a little bit, hasn't it? So
well, even if he is young and in the wrong, do you think Clemmer's going to come wrong and just pull his own mate into the line? Or he might do that behind closed doors. He might say, mate, take fair suck of the saviour, calm down, But in front of everyone and in front of someone he's playing footy against, you're probably going to stick up for your mate regardless.
I think one of the reasons it's still in the news and still being spoken about is because these organisations that are talking about it are very, very, very much need people to click on stories and watch
That's it.
an
That's
RL
exactly
360 and everything. Honestly, can you imagine if Tommy Radonakis and Gus Gould had a bit of push and shove like that in 1981? Like, they go, why aren't they? Why, it'd just be nothing. It'd just be nothing.
They'd get just as many clicks if they had a 24/7 Wayne cam. Just 24/7 cam of Wayne Bennett, and every time he left his house, there was just 40 Dolphin supporters going, "Hey!" I reckon that you'd get that.
Aren't these same sort of journalists and same sort of organisations complaining a week ago or 2 weeks ago that players are too friendly after games?
Yes,
quite possibly. Yeah.
So it's just clickbait as far as I'm concerned.
It's a very
Boys,
good point, Chris.
been wonderful. I need to go. I want to watch the latest episode of Godfather of Harlem. So, I've got to catch up on NRL 360 actually. So I've been coaching tonight, so I'm not seeing any telly.
Oh yeah, you're gonna catch up on 360, see what Kenty has to say.
Mm-hmm.
You got a bit to
I
say.
think we've all just covered it, haven't we?
Probably, yeah.
Well, Kenty's probably just finished watching this episode, and then he'll go and rattle.
I tell you what, there's a few people tell me now. They say that sometimes some of the stuff I word on some of my posts, they then hear it on the radio or something. So the thieving of media is rife at the minute. Like it is out there. I mean, everybody steals their pictures, don't they, to put on socials or whatever. So
yeah,
it is what it is. It is what it is. All right, boys. All three of us have got the specs on tonight.
Yeah.
Like the Proclaimers. The Proclaimers podcast.
Don't start. I won't get it out of my head.
No, that's Kylie. Take care, boys.
I'll pay that. That's great. See ya.